Now, we're going to open a special meeting, and we're going to call this meeting to order. And this is a discussion of, as Mr. Montanez was saying, Mr. Skipworth did a resignation. I'm sure many of you have read it in the paper, you've heard, and he has chosen to focus time with his family. With that, if we want to share a few words, we'll start with Mr. Scott down there.
I had the opportunity of working with Mr. Skipworth on the Planning Commission for 2 years, and there's one thing you can say about Stan, and that is that he looked into every item that was on the agenda. He went through it thoroughly, and I always appreciate that aspect. He also brought forth many times a different perspective, and the more perspectives that we can take into consideration, the better the decisions are and the better path that we set. So I wish Stan and his family the very best, and I thank him for his service to our community.
Well, I agree. For those of us that have worked with Stan, both here on the council and in the community, he has been a great asset, and I wish him and the family well, and hope to see him soon. But his son and my son are actually in law school together, so we probably will see each other around there. But thank you, Stan.
He also has another son who's a Marine, so I think it's pretty good. I wish Stan and Michelle the best and good health.
It is very hard when someone leaves, whether it's full term or the end of a term, because you've sat here next to somebody for 8 years almost, and you know, you become a team. And when one person leaves, as you can see, not only do you have a physical empty seat, but there's a void here within the council. We all bring something to the table. Speaking of that, was times when the Skipworths and the Spiegels, I have 5 kids, and they had, at the time, they only had 6. And we would go out to dinner, the Spiegels and the Skipworths, and you should have seen the looks on people's faces when the group of us walked in. So it's going to be a loss for the Corona community, and we wish well to the Skipworth family and to whatever the future holds for them. So thank you, Stan and Michelle, for all that you've given to Corona. With that, we now have to discuss that there is an empty seat. It won't be filled until December, after the November election, which means we have 4 months of a seat. And so we have to decide. The law says that we are to, within the next 60 days, to either call for a special election or to appoint someone for the seat. Well, obviously, I'm not in favor of a special election with the general election coming up. That's ludicrous, personally. The time you do all the process and everything else, it's going to be hitting the same time. And it's only going to be for the remainder of the term. So our options could be to leave the seat vacant for the remainder of the term, or to fill the seat by appointment. And so that's where I'm going to lead this discussion as to, if anybody is strong one way or the other, I can begin, or unless you guys want to begin.
Go ahead.
My personal feeling is, although it was only the quote in the papers was that, oh, if we have a 2-2 tie. I think reality for me is that you have a vacant seat on the council for a longer than the average length of time of just leaving it empty. I think there's a concern of leaving it empty. One, for the voters. I mean, the opportunity to have representation from another person, the conversation of transparency. Why would we leave the seat empty? There's processes that we could do to fill a seat. I just feel that it's good for the community to put somebody in that seat. My preference is not to have somebody that is in the upcoming election. So the candidates, I apologize to those candidates to say that I don't feel that that's a fair advantage right now. Partly because the closing of the poll, the filing is next week. Those who aren't aware is that extended, the actual closing would have been on the 8th. We extended 5 days because an incumbent is not running for re-election. So that makes the filing period to run for city council till the 13th, which means anybody still has an opportunity if you're interested in running for Corona City Council. There is an open seat. There are 2 incumbents running. So your chances, whenever you have an open seat, there's always a good chance. So what do we want to do with that?
Well, you know, my feelings, I've wavered back and forth personally of leaving the seat open and making an appointment. You know, the law says that we're supposed to fill it within 60 days, which is still prior to the next election. If we're to fill that spot, I think we should do it in a very accelerated manner, but one that would include some input from the community as well. But, you know, we're talking 4 months right now. It could have been 6 months. It could have been 8 months. And so at what point do we have a trigger point? And that's where I think it's incumbent on us to make that appointment, because, you know, if we were talking 30 days, 60 days, I would say probably not. I would say that wouldn't make sense. But I think with a 4-month time frame, it's really incumbent on us to, as you said, to have one more person that the people, the citizens, can go to if they have an issue. And as Mr. Scott had mentioned, we all bring something else to the table, and with our life experiences, and I think it's helpful to have one more voice at the table, whether it's here, whether it's closed session, or whether it's in the community at a grand opening or a civic function. I think, you know, the city deserves to have that extra person out there, and it offers a very unique opportunity for someone in the community who may never run, or who has run and doesn't want to run again. I mean, you know, the opportunity is there that someone could take advantage of it.
And Mr. Munson has brought up a topic that I've received over 20 people interested in filling the seat. So there is an interest of people for a short time that don't want to commit to a full term, that would like to have some input on the city council. With that being said, if we put out an application for city clerk's office, if we put out an application, I'm sure there will be numerous responses. And to involve more citizenry, my suggestion would be to not have the council directly do all of it, but to maybe have a citizenry group, each of us having one representative, that goes through and maybe goes through all the applications and weeds it down to like the final 5 or so. And then we can actually make the decision on the final 5. That way we're involving the community for more input, and they just weed it down to the final 5, because by law we have to make the appointment. It can't be a committee. And that way that the process will be with more eyes, more people involved.
Yeah, and I would agree that that's not a bad idea. I mean, I think however we do this, there's pluses and minuses to virtually everything that we do, even whether we appoint or not appoint. And so I think if we went down that road, it would have to be on, as I mentioned earlier, something that we do very accelerated, something where if we're going to pick someone to be on that committee, we do that within the next couple of days. We put out the application, and obviously we already have a number of interest. I know all of us have probably gotten calls and emails, and we do, you know, a 1-week time frame where people have the time to come in, fill out an application, and then that committee that we would appoint, each appoint one person, could get together, and then we might want to look at, say, the Planning Commission, as someone from the Planning Commission who is not running or whatever, to also be on that, so that we would maybe have 5 members on there, and then have them be the ones that would then bring us back 5, 3 or 5, whatever. I mean, we don't know how many applications we would get, because although we have interest, it doesn't necessarily mean someone will want to go through this process, because it will be a process. It's not going to be easy to go through the process because there's going to be different steps, the application, an interview by a group, and then, possibly, then an interview with us. Because I think how it would all come down to is the final applicants would then come in. We would then, have I would imagine, a special meeting of some sort that we would have time to interview and talk to them and get to know them if we don't know them, type of a thing.
My ultimate goal would be the first meeting in September to hopefully get this done so they have 3 full months.
I'd like to get a little clarification from Dean, because there's, to me, been a mixed message here. So the options are, we can do a special election, which leading up to an election. Second option is we can appoint, but then there's a third option that we can leave it vacant. Is that third option?
Well, the third option is really an offshoot of your first option, because to call a special election, the statute provides that you can't call that special election for, sooner than 114 days from the date of the vacancy. Well, obviously, that's beyond your November election when this particular seat is already up for election. So, in interpreting the statute, we believe the reasonable interpretation, and we understand other cities have interpreted it this way throughout the state in other situations, is that instead of calling a special election, we believe that you have the authority to simply let the general regular election in November be used for a selection of the replacement. You're obviously not filling the remainder of the term because that term is up at that election. But we don't believe that the statute forces you to appoint somebody simply because the special election procedure can't be accomplished. You don't have the time to do the special election procedure. Again, the statute says the special election can't be held less than 114 days. And it's at the next regular election date that is not less than 114 days. What that means, therefore, is it takes you out to March 3rd. The state, by statute, sets regular election dates. The next regular election date beyond November is March 3rd. So that can't happen. So we believe that you have the authority to simply let the electorate select the replacement like they normally would do in November when the term expires. The reasoning being, if the statute allows you to leave it vacant for at least 114 days, then we believe it allows you to leave it vacant and let the electorate select the replacement in a less period of time than the 114 days. So that's what we believe. So you really have 2 options: let the election occur in November and leave it vacant until then, or fill it by appointment.
And to let it go through to November and leaving it vacant, would we have to indicate by motion that we are looking at a special election?
I think you could, well, you're not looking at a special election, no, but I think 2 things can happen. I think that you as a council, as a majority, can decide to simply let the general election occur in November and leave it vacant until then. Or 2, if you can't decide on an appointment, meaning if you have let's say you have 4 of you, so if you have a 2-2 vote, 2 want to appoint, 2 want the general election to occur, by default, the general election will occur at that point.
Thank you.
So you can either do it affirmatively by a 3-1 or a 4-0 vote, or 2-2 would result in the same thing. The general election would decide the replacement in November as normal.